Chad, we talked a few episodes ago. I want to say that maybe it was 342.
343.
We talked 343. Thanks, Chad. We talked all about strength training from the like science and basically the mechanism level. We talked about that overlap that exists where people, the fear is that if you do strength training and you do aerobic conditioning at the same time, endurance training, that they overlap, the signals get crossed and you don't get the desired adaptations out of either. We kind of debunked that. We showed that while mechanistically that may look like that's the case, in terms of performance outcomes and studies, it hasn't backed that up. We haven't been able to find that. Mm-hmm. Now, today, we want to take that and kind of make the rubber meet the road a bit, if you will. So talk about how we apply all that knowledge. And Alex, I know that you are a regular strength trainer. You share that on your Instagram and you've talked about it here on the podcast before.
I just take photos of my gym 3 times a week and then leave.
Here's where I would work out.
So let's talk. We'll talk all about strength training. Chad, where do you want to kick it off? All 3 of us will be able to contribute here, but where do you want to start?
For sure. So first off, it may be 342. Now that I think about it, I can't remember the last time I was on here. It's been a week or 2 weeks, but it's 342 or 343. Shouldn't be too hard to track down, but it is part 1 of this 2-parter, and it dealt with the interference effect. And I wanted to make this one a bit more practical. So do trust that all this is science backed. I have done the reading quite literally over the last couple of decades, really, but super hard over the last month or so, just trying to refresh and discover what new learnings may have surfaced. And then, of course, I'm a huge proponent or very avid reader of the monthly applications in strength sport from Science and Stronger by Science. Those guys handle the strength side of things, I hope, as well as we handle the endurance side of things, but probably a lot better considering they're all legit researchers. In any case, if you're interested in the strength science side of things, that is a fantastic resource. Mm-hmm. Okay, so first off, I need to set the stage. What we're going to do today is go through just a host of questions that we've gotten that all relate to strength training. These are questions we've seen cropped up again and again and again and again, and now we're finally going to address them all in one fell swoop because each of them didn't really merit a deep dive, but they definitely merited a thoughtful answer. So gonna do that. Before I get to the questions, though, I just want to kind of set the stage with a bit of a preamble, starting with the value of strength training for endurance athletes. Not to get too scientific on it, but we're chasing particular adaptations. Some of them are musculotendinous stiffness. You know, we don't want the work we're putting into the pedals or into the road as a runner to be absorbed by our joints. So a certain level of stiffness is a sought after, desired thing. Muscle unit recruitment and synchronization. Basically, we want to get a lot of muscles and we want them to work effectively together, not against one another. Rate coding, which is basically the rate at which they fire. Intra and intermuscular coordination. So get rid of those 2 big words and just coordination. Neural inhibition. We want muscles to shut off when we're done with them. We don't want antagonist muscles to resist them. And all of these things basically improve our neuromuscular communication. So the communication that takes place between our neural system, so our central nervous system, and the muscles themselves. And the takeaway here is that all of this plays into something that's very relatable to us, something we seek, cycling economy. So we're trying to improve our efficiency. On top of that, bigger muscles, bigger muscle fibers can do more work. And really the simple takeaway there is that when we increase our anaerobic power and then our anaerobic capacity, which is simply the buffering so that we can draw that power out to longer durations, these are things we're looking for via strength training. These are things we can affect. The why of strength training for endurance athletes is that low force or really endurance contractions are pretty ineffective in this neuromuscular realm. They're also pretty ineffective in promoting bone growth. And this is especially true for roadies. It's less true for mountain bikers, for multi-sport athletes who do running, for track sprinters or sprinters, because they're doing harder contractions. And it does extend a bit to interval work, but no topic for another time. So, but if you're a roadie and you're largely doing long days, you're never exerting yourself in terms of the force necessary to turn the pedal each time. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions, but none of them are high force. So they don't carry with them the benefits that we're seeking when we strength train. Okay. So
Chad, there are one quick thing really quick on the high force part, because a lot of people would say that like, yeah, well, I mix in a sprint or I do like, some sprints and that's high force, but we've talked about that before. That's still very different than specific strength training efforts, right? It's still not as hard as you think it would be in terms of like that force structure still doesn't get the job done like you want. Yeah,
it might be useful in some ways, and it might kind of lean towards some of these objectives or these physiological adaptations that we're seeking, but it's not going to carry the weight of it. It's just not enough, frankly. And really, I mean, even a sprint, if it's carried out over anything more than like 5 or 6 seconds, is starting to become increasingly aerobic anyway. So just apples and oranges here. Okay, so there are many goals of adding strength training workouts to our endurance training, but primarily we're after one thing, and that's functional strength. And I know that's kind of a buzzy term, but we want functional strength that leads to improved endurance performance. We're not concerned with greater force capabilities when we lift heavy or by lifting heavy. We're not increased with, or we're not fascinated or seeking increased rate of force development. We're not trying to be able to bring more muscles on board more rapidly through plyometric and explosive activities. Those are things we can seek once the foundation is laid, but research supporting the claims of endurance performance improvement via these methods, heavy strength training, explosive strength training, is not as unequivocal. It's still a bit ambiguous as we're led to believe. And for a number of reasons. I mean, the studies are always small. They'll take 15 subjects and split them into a control side, so an endurance side, and then an endurance and strength side, and you're left with 7 athletes. And that's not nothing. There's still useful findings, but it is a small data pool. Various designs, they're incomparable. So when you try to sum these up in a systematic review, pretty tough. Confounding factors, whether they're controlled or uncontrolled, make their way into it. The rep ranges are well outside the heavy range. I mean, when we talk about heavy strength training, we're talking about 1 to 3 reps, maybe 3 to 5 reps. And a lot of these studies are talking about 8 to 10 reps. It's just not the same thing. So I just can't place as much faith in those studies as I used to. And that's influenced by other findings as well. So in my humble opinion, I do believe that a lot of these studies miss the mark by misattributing their performance increases to the wrong factors. And that's a topic for a whole other time. In fact, that'd be a great science of getting faster topic. In addition to that, strength training benefits are far wider ranging than the literature would have us believe. They try to pin it down to things that are just too specific. And I believe the benefits are just wider, period. So it's my contention that the forms of strength training that lay the stage for this heavier, this explosive lifting are the true benefactors to endurance performance. And whether you agree with me or disagree with me, these are the forms of strength training that have to be done anyway, because if you're going to work up to those other forms of lifting, you have to lay the foundation. So do them. Worry about going heavy when you get to a place where you can lift heavy without a high risk of injury. So I know
this is like, Alex, were you tempted when you first started strength training so typically it's like, all right, get your 1 rep max. And from your 1 rep max, you scale everything out. And then from the strength training side, not the cyclist side, the strength training side, there's like this temptation to dwell closer to your 1 rep max and to look at those days where, from the uneducated strength training side, I should say, from the newbie side to it, it's like, yeah, well, if you're doing 8 to 12 reps or something like that, then that's not even really, that's not even making you really strong, or that's not accomplishing the objective. That's kind of the newbie perspective. Did you face that temptation, Alex, when you started strength training as an endurance athlete?
Yeah, I mean, I just load all the plates on, take the photo, and then lift afterwards. But yeah, I think everybody falls into that trap. And with most things, being honest with yourselves is super useful. And it's not obviously necessarily for Instagram, but it's like you want to be able to lift more. We're so used to watts. More watts is better. So more weight must be better as well. But really understanding that doing the motion incorrectly with more weight is worse and not achieving what you're looking for than less weight doing the motion correctly. So it's like if you're, jerky through the motion, or, not getting the full range of motion on the workout, or, and it exacerbates anything. Like, what if your right knee is kicking out just a little bit? It's like, if you're doing that with a ton of weight, you're going to feel it. But if you really go, like when I first hop in the gym after my 2 weeks off, I'm doing just the bar on most things. And that's just watching form. Like I have the mirror in front of my squat rack, making sure knees are tracking well, making sure like just the mental cues are there. Like I'm driving through my heels, that like I'm stacked at the top when it's coming to deadlifts or squats, that, you know, for deadlifts, like I'm scraping the bar against my shins, like just those cues each time. I'll do probably a couple weeks of just body weight focused exercises so that it's mental, like it's just memory after that. And then I'll slowly stack on weight. I think it's a good opportunity too, because as you first get in the gym, that bar can still feel heavy. And then as Chad's talked about in the past, you get that, is it neuromuscular connection when you get the big jump in weight, even though you haven't got any stronger, as your body kind of gets into the gym. And so it's a good opportunity during that time where you can't lift as much to use it to really focus on form, so that when you do start stacking on weight, the form's already there.
Yeah, that's you teed me up perfectly, because that's those that neural reinforcement that you receive by starting light and just drilling the movements is one of the key ways in basically focus on what I want most athletes to take away from this talk, is that one of our two objectives, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, is minimizing injury. This should be at the forefront of all athletes' minds. It doesn't matter if you're strength training, endurance training, concurrent training, it applies to all of us. So in line with that, what I believe to be the two most overlooked objectives when it comes to strength training should be injury avoidance and fatigue management. And the fatigue management is a bit more geared toward endurance athletes. So when it comes to injury, that can derail everything. I mean, even the smallest injuries can be just a tremendous setback. When it comes to fatigue, if you mismanage your fatigue, that can compromise the quality of all your workouts. So you're doing the work, but you're just not gaining as much of the benefit from it as you could be if you manage your fatigue better. Both of these require patience. Big word, or big important word there. This is a process, and it's a gradual one. And we as endurance athletes can come into strength training and other things, other forms of endurance training, and be misled because we've got big engines, we've got big fitness. And we've talked many times about how the cycling and running interaction are a perfect example of this. You got a big engine, you can do a lot of work, but this results in connective tissue damage or injury, and often enough, long recovery trajectories, because first off, that tissue takes a long time to heal. Secondly, most of us don't want to wait for it to heal completely. So as soon as we're feeling reasonably good again, we're going to start to pile load on. And if we're getting through that, even if it takes 5 minutes to get through that first rough patch, we're back on track. Everything's good. I'm healed. So I'm really going to go for it today. And we just prolong that recovery process. And the reason for this injury is that muscle tissue responds relatively quickly to strength training, but connective tissue does not. And because of this, it's the first of many reasons that I favor kind of what Alex just described: lighter load, higher rep schemes. And he described it for a brief period. I'm going to take it even further, and we'll get to that. But our connective tissue responds best to frequent loading. And really, I believe it comes down to increased doses of blood and therefore nutrients. And while we're on this topic, I do suggest that for the readers out there, a book by Matt Perryman titled Squat Every Day. Jonathan alluded to this: the more frequently he lifts, the better he feels, the better he moves. And there are reasons behind that. And there are a lot of interesting insights in this book. Honestly, it sounds so flattering, but this is the book I would have written. I'm so in line with the way this guy thinks. It's fascinating. A really good read. Okay, so that's running, but it's also easy to overdo strength training. And in particular, it's too much volume in addition to the volume of endurance training we're already doing. And a couple of things are going to happen. A lot of things are going to happen, but a couple of them are that central fatigue ensues. And that means everything suffers. If your brain doesn't have both hands on the wheel, everything's going to suffer to some extent. Peripheral fatigue ensues, so in the muscles. And that means what I just talked about is that your quality suffers. And on top of that, the likelihood of injury is going to escalate. So because of these two things and a number of others, a real focus on fatigue management is absolutely necessary. And it's for this reason, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself again, that I cap strength training workouts at 30 minutes. I even try to keep them closer to 20 minutes in the beginning. Doesn't mean you can't grow them past that, but starting any more than that is a recipe for burnout, potential injury, discouragement, all of that.
That's like a huge trigger point for cyclists too, because it's like, well, I'm used to doing something for 2 hours.
Oh, totally.
And especially if you go to a gym and there's so many things you can do at that gym, right? Like so many different pieces of equipment that you could use, and you could spend the whole day there. So it's really easy. We see this with running too, when cyclists get out there and they're like, I only ran for 15 minutes. Like, no, I ride my bike for 2 hours, and that's a normal workout. So I'm going to keep going. And then you end up destroying your legs completely. You have to start out small. And even then, like with strength training, they're really, for the intents and purposes of a cyclist that is using strength training, there's no benefit to you putting in a long, big, gigantic set in at there, or like, a circuit, anything else that you're doing there at the gym. It's just about being strategic about it. It's a totally different approach. When
I was coming through the document, I did come across one question that we didn't include in the 14 that are coming up, by the way. It said something about my next strength training session, blah, 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 60 to 90 minutes. And as soon as I saw that, like, are you a strength athlete? Because if you're an endurance athlete, you are getting it wrong. That is too much time to spend in the gym, because unless you're doing it once a week, and then what's the point of it anyway? But yeah, 20 to 30 minutes. I mean it. Start there. You can always grow it later. Same goes with running, as Jonathan just mentioned. I mean, when I started training for triathlon, they were 15-minute runs, and I was you stack a few of those in a week, and I had sore knees, sore hips. I mean, things were not ready for that type of abuse. I had never exposed my body to it. Even though I was very fit as a cyclist, my joints were not prepared. But I did it slowly, and I paid attention to the people who had a lot of experience, and it did pay off.
Yeah. It's fantastic points to make. Chad, I'm going to read the first question. Everybody ready? Here we go. When should I schedule my strength training in relation to my TrainerRoad endurance training days? So this is probably the most common question we get with strength training. And I'm going to start to close my blinds because I'm looking washed out here. I apologize to everybody on YouTube.
You're a little pale there, bro. Okay.
I mean, it's honest, but...
Okay. So in the context of TrainerRoad training plans, low, mid, high volume, with low volume, it's really pretty straightforward because you're on for 3 days and you're off for 4 days. So as long as you separate your strength training by 48 hours, which the literature does seem to all point to, that's an optimal range for muscle recovery, and not too long before you start to detrain. That would mean something like a Monday, Wednesday, since you're riding the bike Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or a Wednesday, Sunday. Obviously, if you're not endurance training on those days, move things around, but do try to give yourself a couple of days between strength training sessions. Gets a little trickier when you move into mid volume and high volume. You're faced with basically two options. You either have to double up, because we're shooting for, and we'll get to this, but a couple of days a week, maybe 3, but let's just focus on 2 for now. You're either going to have to double up, or you're going to have to use your recovery days. Now, recovery day strength training is always an option, but you have to be mindful, because even a low quality kind of fatigue strength training session can interrupt your endurance training recovery. It can also place a bit of stress on your whole nutrition recovery, really. If you're trying to reload stores, but you're doing more work on top of it, well, you better be eating more to get on top of it, and also hoping that you're assimilating that nutrition and it's the right kind, and it gets a little tricky. So do recognize that there are nutritional challenges on top of the recovery ones, and the two really do go hand in hand. Additionally, a single workout can actually impact many that follow. And this ties to the same things, fatigue and energy stores. So once you're behind it, it's really hard to get back in front of it unless you're, cognizant of it.
So Alex, how do you stack your strength training workouts in relation to the endurance training workouts?
I normally do strength training. So my cycling week is Tuesday through Sunday, with Monday always off. And then I do my strength training Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And that tends to normally fall that Tuesday and Saturday are more structured, bigger days. And Thursday is normally like some sort of zone 2 workout. And so
when you say structured, bigger days, are you talking higher intensity interval work?
Yeah, more like threshold or sweet spot stuff. Everything's structured, obviously, but more like going above zone 2 on those days. And then Thursday tends to be more of a zone 2 endurance ride. So what I'll do is I'll do gym first thing in the morning, and then try to get 3 hours between gym and riding, and ride in the afternoon.
One thing that we've mentioned is that if you're new to strength training, you don't want to go into lifting that bar and doing these movements if you're fatigued, right? So Alex has time doing strength training, so he understands the proper technique. If you do a workout on your bike and you're just completely thrashed, and then you go and you try to have coordination and be able to lift properly with good technique, that can be tricky. You'll get used to it over time, and you'll be able to do it afterward if you need to. It'll be no issue. You'll be able to do it beforehand, vice versa. And it really will come down to like preference of what you want to do. For me, I like putting my bike work first when possible. Like if my schedule allows it, I prefer to put my bike work first and then strength training second, because I'm not pushing my 1 rep max. I'm not doing anything where I'm like, oh, this is really like, I'm compromising my ability to complete my strength workout with my bike work. That's never the case. I just like to usually get the bike stuff done better. That said, my routine and my schedule usually favors doing strength training earlier in the morning versus riding the bike and doing a longer workout earlier in the morning. So you have to experiment and see what works best. And along the lines of experimentation, you also have to find out what works best for you in terms of pairing it with intense days or pairing it with less intense days. Mm-hmm. And for me, if I'm doing a higher volume plan, I am not going to stack the strength training on easy days. I'm going to stack it on the harder days. And that may seem counterintuitive, but what I'm going for there is that I want those easier days to be more easy. I don't want to make an easy day harder than it should, because I need that midweek replenishment, right? I need to be able to carry a little less fatigue into the subsequent workouts. So in that case, I'll do it on the harder days. I'll do it afterward in that case too, if the bike work is really strenuous. You never want to let strength training compromise your bike training if bike training is your main goal. That's like the number one rule to keep in mind. So however you need to structure it, it all depends on that, right, Chad?
It's important to recognize that there's a neural component with everything we do in terms of physical stress, but there's a far greater neural component typically on the strength training side of things. So that neural fatigue can heftily impact everything you're trying to do, which may not be a big deal if you're neurally fatigued and you're just going to go out and ride for an hour and a half at 60% of your FTP. But if you have to muster a lot of focus, a lot of mental resources, that's going to be a tougher thing to do if you really just spent yourself in the gym.
If I could add, Alex,
but some athletes can do it. So, and this does speak to the subjectivity we're going to talk quite a bit about in the subsequent questions.
Yeah, I agree with what
Alex, go ahead.
What Jonathan was saying. So Friday tends to be like, if I have a midweek spin, like if we're not doing like 6 weeks straight, Friday tends to be that easy day. Very rarely is Thursday that easy day. So I try not to stack those as well. But if that does happen, the nice thing is normally the way those 3 strength training sessions go is Tuesday is more of what you'd consider, I guess, a leg day. And then Thursday is more of an arm day. And then Saturday is more of a mix. So if that Thursday does fall on the recovery spin day, then at least it's arms. And so the legs still have time to recover there. And then the reason I chose morning is I'm not really a morning person. So getting up and riding at sunrise doesn't really suit my brain. I much rather chase the sunset. And then also back to Jonathan's point, our thought was just if we're stacking them on interval days and I come back and the form's not there because I'm cracked from the ride, then that could cause more damage than being fatigued on an interval day.
Yeah, great points. So I'm going to recap it for people. If I'm on a low volume plan, I'm going to fit into strength training on the days that I'm not training on the bike. That's what Chad's recommendation was, right? If I'm on a mid volume plan, I'll still see if it's possible for me to do the strength training on the days that I'm not on the bike. However, if I feel like I need that recuperative element of a day off, then I won't do that. Instead, I'll be likely to stack it onto a day where I'm doing something that's going to be like sub threshold. If I'm doing a high volume plan and I feel like I'm bumping up against the stops, I'm going to try to keep the days that are sub threshold, keep them as they are to allow my body to recuperate a bit more. And instead, I'll be tacking it onto a day when I'm doing a bit more work. Regardless, if you have like one recovery day a week, I don't think it's a good day to do gym work. If you're doing 6 days of training and then going into that, it might work for you and you can try it for sure. But if you're training 6 days a week, then you probably want to give yourself one day fully off. It's just, it would be tough to go 7,
I'd be very careful about compromising that one day off. You might be able to do it 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks and then 3 months down the road, you're like, why am I so tired? So
that's the hardest part about all of this, is that when you make these changes, you can't judge it based on how you feel 1 week. You have to look at how you feel 4 weeks later after doing it with consistency, because that's when you start to see the compounding effect.
Yeah, my brother does the first example, which seems to work for him. Is he's on more of a low volume and he'll do either a ride or a lift. And I think he does 2 lifting days a week, and then he still does Monday completely off. So he's able to get those rides in and then do gym days on the days he's not riding, which for somebody with his goals is actually great for winter as well. Because what he'll do is he can move those sessions around and like, oh, it's raining on Thursday, I'll do my gym on Thursday and I'll ride on Friday or whatever. So having that flexibility is also helpful. And I'm sure AT can do those calculations for you if you move stuff around.
Yes, sir.
Plug.
Thanks, Alex. Adaptive Training, TrainerRoad.com. Chad, I'm going to read the next one. Are the rules for separating strength training from endurance training different when you're lifting heavy versus higher endurance reps versus core strength and activation exercises?
Okay. So brief point. First off, let's move away from the use of endurance reps. You have strength training, you have endurance training, never the twain shall meet. Okay. So, and it sounds like semantics, but it's not, because they are different things and we're chasing different effects. Excuse me. So if you're going into the gym and you're doing things like wall balls and burpees and body weight squats, jumping rope, all that, that actually does qualify as endurance work because of its nature. That is what it is, but that's not strength training. So you may be in a gym, but that's not strength training. Weightlifting, anytime you're moving a load, other than your legs against the pedals or your feet against the ground, strength training doesn't typically happen at 50 to 60 repetitions per minute. We're never moving weight that rapidly. And that's a super low turnover on the run, cadence on the bike. So it's not even really practical, but that does still qualify for sure as endurance work. That's not something that translates to the gym. So really, if you're asking for rules, there's really just one rule that I've already mentioned. It's fatigue management. So fatigue compounds if you don't get on top of it. And while nutrition can be a really big component of managing your fatigue, I heartily believe that you can't eat your way out of too much training stress. And I know Nate would probably like to argue otherwise. Keegan and Sophia, they're really good at nourishing. So it may give you the impression that you can, but no, their bodies have adapted to that stress and they nourish it very well. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, what sort of combined training load will I face? Or really a better question might be, how fatigued will this particular combination leave me? And yes, that does mean there's going to be a bit of trial and error, but that's because there's no one right way. There just isn't. You have to personalize these combinations based on personal training responses. And in this case, training notes or really good memory is vital when you're beginning this merge between strength training and endurance training, or more simply concurrent training.
I've gotten a lot of questions on Instagram when I post screenshots because I've started using it recently, but Train Heroic is actually a really good app for tracking this stuff, because it'll tell you what you did. Like the last time you did this exercise, at the top, it'll tell you like you did 5 reps of 8 and you did this weight, and it'll tell you exactly what you did like at the top. So I used to track it in notes, but it was like, wait, when's the last time I did Bulgarian split squats? So it's like it recognizes the exercise you're doing and tells you what you were doing last time you did it. So it's a good benchmark of, okay, where should I start? So that's been super helpful. And honestly, every time I post a screenshot, I get like 10 messages. What app is this? So thought I would share it here.
TrainerRoad athlete and strength trainer Derek Teal. He has a strength training company focused on cyclists called Dialed Health. His service does that too now, Alex. It's pretty sweet. So, because then that allows you to keep track of that and to be able to see when you did things at different times and how much it was. One thing that I'm looking at with this is the discussion of core strength versus activation versus higher endurance versus lifting heavy. It's kind of like segmenting all of the strength training stuff in there. And if you like lifting just to lift, then you're probably going to want to segment your strength training a bit more, right? In the sense that if you have days, like I'm thinking of Roman, he's another TrainerRoad user, extremely fit cyclist from New York, and also a really, really strong strength athlete. Like he can lift some serious stuff and he loves that. He loves having days where he goes and lifts heavy. So I know that there are a lot of you listening to this that like to lift heavy and also like to be fast on a bike. That combination absolutely exists. And in that case, yeah, you're going to have to separate your strength training a bit more. In my personal experience, I'm not going for 1 rep maxes or anything like that. In my personal experience, what I've found is that I don't get a whole lot of benefit from being too selective on separating my strength training, like being like, today's a core exercise, so I can overlap it with anything. But since tomorrow's a leg exercise, I can't overlap it with anything. And I have not found that to be the case because I don't think I'm pushing it too hard on the strength side. If you're doing body weight work, that sort of thing, you probably don't have to worry a whole lot. At the beginning, you'll be super sore if you haven't started doing it because it will be a change in stimulus and something your body's not used to. But if you're doing body weight work and stuff that's relatively light, I haven't noticed any sort of like benefit in being like, nope, only legs today, or only, anything but legs today. So that's just I guess a personal anecdote on going with that.
Your hammers will just yell at you the whole ride.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At first. Right. And then you'll get used to it. For my 3 strength sessions a week, one of those is just a day dedicated to core work, but I'll say trunk work because I know Chad likes that word better than core. So that's involving everything basically from here, and it's involving it down to below my butt, basically. And so it's a lot of work there. And then the other days will be stuff that works everything across my whole body. So it'll be a mix of upper body and lower body, mostly functional movements, which we'll cover in a bit here after these questions. So you don't have to be too strict about if you're a cyclist and you're not trying to move the needle too much, you don't have to be too strict about separating everything with your strength work. Just an anecdote. Okay, third one. Is there a combination of specific type of interval training and a specific type of strength training that should be avoided, or perhaps another that pairs particularly well?
Okay. So from the first part of this 2-part strength training deep dive in 342 or 343, we discussed the interference effect, and it addresses this question in great depth, but to sum up some of the findings, when it comes to same day training, sweet spot work prior to core training seems to work quite well. VO2 max training following heavy strength training apparently pairs pretty nicely, at least in the research. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but it does mean it worked significantly well for
nicely
those
as
people.
In you get results, people, not nicely as in it's going to be any fun. Just so we're clear.
No, very, very improbable.
I can speak from experience.
And on that note, same day heavy strength training followed immediately by high intensity interval training. There was a study that backed that up as well. So again, works for some, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Maybe.
Haven't and won't try that one.
Yeah. And one of the things that you talked about, Chad, is I think, was it a 3 or 4 hour window was
getting to that. Yep.
Kind of like the preferred spacing, if you can.
Yep.
Yeah.
So strength training followed immediately by endurance riding, didn't exhibit any of the endurance effect. And I think that was across athletes, not even high level from beginner. Strength training immediately following endurance training or endurance riding exhibited a positive endurance training effect, oddly enough. So
I think that's Keegan's favorite.
I give these 4 examples because I don't want people to sweat the combination. Nourish appropriately, separate by, and this is literature-based, 3 to 6 hours seems to be a necessary window. 24 hours is optimal, but you can make really short spans of time between your endurance training and your strength training still work really well. Both benefits on both sides of it.
I kind of want to stress this point as we deep dive into strength training. It's going to make you try to achieve perfection. But if you are not strength training, just strength train first. Just get in your schedule where you can, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be better than not lifting.
We're going to talk about that for sure. So again, this goes back to probably taking notes, but you have to pay attention to your strength training and your endurance training workout pairings. And for example, my best strength training workouts seem to come about 12 hours after I've done VO2 max work, specifically on ops. For whatever reason, if I do those in the afternoon, the next day I consistently have really good days in the gym. So this is something that has worked for me. So also note though that the tolerable volume, so combining these 2 things together is super subjective, and it depends on so many things. And we've already touched on a lot of them. One is training history, because if you're not an experienced lifter, you're new to lifting, you need to baby step into this. Don't be bold. Be err on the side of err on the conservative side. What's your allostatic load? What sort of stressors are you facing in the moment, in the day, in the week? Muscle fiber composition, something you probably won't know, but athletes who are predominantly fast twitch typically take longer to bounce back from strength training sessions. Gender has shown to have an influence, though a subtle one, still one, and it could tie back to that muscle fiber composition issue. Age. No one needs to be told that age will influence their recovery trajectory. This is real, especially when you add strength training on top of endurance training.
Next question. Should I feel my strength training work like I do my endurance training work?
Okay, so this will come down to really two things, right? Protein and carbohydrate. So protein, the typical recommendation, ACSM, whatever acronym is behind it, is 0.8 grams per kilogram, all the way up to about 1.2 grams per kilogram. With the addition of endurance training, strength training, that can rise as high as 2 grams per kilogram. All I'm trying to point out here is that it's a big topic. And because of that, I'm going to do a protein deep dive, the next podcast that I'm on, I think a couple weeks down the road. So this is a bigger topic than we can sum up, but those are the general recommendations. When it comes to training more metabolically, and Alex talked about, we had a talk before the podcast started, he's doing some very metabolic conditioning, and that's all good and fine. If you're piling it on top of what you're already doing, I hope you know it works, or you're substituting a VO2 max workout in the gym for a VO2 max workout that was to take place on the bike. In this case, you feel like your endurance training, just recognize the short duration. I mean, if you're going to be in the gym, God forbid, for 2 hours, you're probably going to need some nourishment during that 2 hours, but really come into it preloaded. If you're straight out of bed, it's the banana or the gel 10 minutes before getting on the bike. During is going to depend on the duration of the workout, but if you're doing 20 or 30 minutes, it's not going to be an issue at all. And then post is obviously a big concern. And post brings us to the next question, which I'll go ahead and read. As an endurance athlete, I'm worried about bulking up and messing up my watts per kg. Should I be worried about this? So this has to do with protein intake, right? Nourishment in general, protein specifically. My words of advice are: don't fear hypertrophy. Bigger muscles are not a bad thing. And getting bigger muscles are way harder than you think they are, especially as an endurance athlete. First off, more muscle mass needs to be nourished. So if you're already probably not feeding yourself well enough, don't expect a bunch of muscle to just suddenly appear on your frame. Secondly, hypertrophy, bigger muscles needs high strength training loads. So if you're not really focused on strength training, you're probably not going to bulk up. It's so unlikely. Thirdly, hypertrophy needs sufficient recovery. And let's be honest, us as endurance athletes, we kind of suck at this. We're go, 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 type A, got to do this workout on this day at this time. And I got to follow it up with this one. And now we're trying to mesh this with strength training, which means there's going to be less recovery and more work. Chances are you're probably going to, sadly, undernourish. And then finally, if you can swing it, if you can actually add a little mass to your body, most of us can benefit from the addition of a little lean mass. I can't think of any athlete that I interact with or see that couldn't deal with another kilogram of lean mass distributed all across the body. I mean, that's 2.2 pounds of muscle that drives versus flab that rides. I mean, why wouldn't you want that? It's worthwhile.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, it's when you talk about Chad, going back to the neuromuscular coordination that a cyclist needs to be able to, whether it's effectively produce power in a TT position or sprint, or do so on a climb, or do so for long periods of time, more muscle within reason. You don't want to be, some big muscle bound Ninja Turtle, but more muscle helps in that regard. And especially what strength training does above all is it allows different muscles to work in different ways that ends up making them more capable. So, you talked about
functional.
That point where you have muscles that kind of like work against each other. And as a result, you're unable to produce as much power or as much speed on the bike as you'd like to. And I know that seems really silly, but that is really common. And that's what you feel, that lack of efficiency after you take time off, or after you've been training without strength training or doing anything else just other than riding your bike for a long time. That happens. Like, we build up those bad habits when our quad is trying to extend or trying to contract. And then we have our hamstrings and everything else also at the same time pulling kind of in the opposite direction rather than working together. It happens. Like, this is not uncommon. And when you strength train, it allows you to build levels of coordination that you just simply can't when all you do is pedal the bike. It's super Yeah. Super important stuff. You'll feel the difference. Everything just works better. Okay. Sixth question. As an endurance athlete, how much of the following strength training should I be doing? Legs, core, and upper body? Because there's a popular opinion on this, Chad, that like all you need to do is core work as a cyclist, and that's it. I mean, there was a whole book about that, really. So,
there's a lot of books about it, and there's just so many different directions to go. So I try to remind people. I think over the course of my training career, when I actually worked directly with people, I trained 4 or 5 times as many endurance athletes on the strength side of thing as I did train their endurance end of things. They had that down or couldn't afford both sides of it, whatever. I trained a lot of people in the gym, and 9 out of 10 of them were endurance athletes. What I try to remind them on a consistent basis is that we are endurance athletes. We're not strength athletes. Complexity has no place here. Split routines, push-pull routine, undulating periodization, all these things that you can do with your strength training, that's all good and fine from the strength side of things. If you're a strength athlete trying to be the best strength athlete you can be. But for us, super simple. When it comes to the movements, press, pull, hinge, squat. More details on that will follow, but it is that simple. We seek modest improvements in our strength capabilities. We're not looking for maximization. So keep it simple, total body every time. Any more than that, and you're committing yourself to more time in the gym and less time on the bike. So that's your dilemma to weigh based on your current and even your long-term goals. This may work for you. This may be what you're after, but ask yourself, what am I first? An endurance athlete? Because if that's the case, too much time in the gym is counterproductive. And of course, there are special cases, and they know who they are. I mean, track sprinters, they're not going to apologize for bulking up, for spending inordinate amounts of time in the gym. It's a necessary trait for them. They have to have those big muscles. But for most of us, in my opinion, I see it as compound movements done with moderate loads and high repetitions. And I'm talking somewhere in the 15 to 20 repetition range. No problem, no reason to not push even further than that into the 20 to 30 range. I know it sounds ridiculously high, and now we're thinking, oh my God, these are endurance reps again. They're not. What we're after here is, perhaps you've heard the term greasing the groove. We're trying to bed in proper mechanics, and that happens with repetition, and it's easier to achieve when you're not moving big loads. Loads big enough to make your muscles burn, to make you really want to be done with that set of exercises, to make you fear the next one. That all happens with those reps. You just do more times with a little less weight. But again, injury avoidance, and we address this with these lighter loads, these better movement patterns being reinforced, and fatigue management, leaving reps in repetition, we're going to get to that shortly, are the objectives that move us toward this functional strength goal.
Well said, Chad. The 7th question: sweet spot sessions in addition to weights completely fry me, but I really want to weight train this time of year, and this time of year being hinted at as the post-race season. So this is, common, I guess, request from people.
It is. And what's the temptation here but to apply your big engine? I mean, you're really good at doing more metabolic workouts. I mean, most of us, not great at strength training, but we're super good at banging out the repetitions. So we lean toward circuit style training, right? And there's not a problem with that depending on what you're after. But if you're doing a whole bunch of exercises and moving from one to the next with little recovery, you're kind of turning this into a VO2 max / metabolic workout. And that's all good and fine. But again, what are your goals? Compound movements like man makers or Turkish get-ups or those renegade push-ups or thrusters, explosive movements like wall balls, jump rope, whether it's the double unders or singles, box jumps, depth jumps, burpees, all these things have their place, but they check a lot of boxes, but they have to be weighted. You have to be training movements and not muscles. So kind of lost the plot there. But what I'm trying to get back to is that it's an easy temptation to fall into the rut of, I do hard metabolic work on the bike and I'm good at it, so I'm going to do hard metabolic work in the gym because it just feels right to me. But it takes a big toll. Mm-hmm. So, and this is a side point, and I'm not sure how I got here from where we are right now, but strength training is a year-round commitment, or really don't bother. But don't worry, because maintenance training, which we're going to get to also, requires very little. Sorry, I went a little off track on that one.
No worries. But I think, Alex, you noticed this. You mentioned this in the beginning, right? About sweet spot sessions or like, those sort of like harder sessions in addition to training can hurt. Did you find an adaptation period where you got to the point where like, okay, my body's used to this level of compounding stress from these two different things?
Used to it mentally, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel like the goals in the gym are right now in the off season are pretty big. And you were talking earlier about, am I a strength athlete or am I a cycling athlete? And with this section, cycling being, I guess, relatively aerobic in the grand scheme of things, higher volume, zone 2, as well as some sweet spot and threshold, we have the capacity and room to push it in the gym. So I think as soon as I get used to anything, that's the day that the workout changes the next week and I'm no longer used to it. So
for sure. And I don't want to pretend that there isn't benefit from training this way, but piling really metabolic conditioning on top of sweet spot work, both of which are really take a heavy toll on energy stores. I mean, again, you can stay on your nutrition to an extent, but again, you can't eat your way out of too much stress.
Oh, for sure. And I think maybe the misconception is that the entire workout has to be one or the other. Like we may have one metabolic circuit within a workout,
sure,
but the workout started with Romanian deadlifts and Bulgarian split squats and workouts like that. And then it finishes off with a circuit. So it's like you said, we're trying to get after a little bit of everything, but also with my goals being oriented towards the lifetime Grand Prix and longer stuff, we've identified a gap being my fat utilization, and that I was a very glycolytic athlete coming out of XCO racing. So this combined with some fasted rides, like no breakfast, not eating for the first hour, and then going into fueling regularly and stuff like that, we're looking for a metabolic shift to push up the wattage I can push while burning primarily fat. So again, keep in mind the goals you have and make sure that those are aligned. So
you just caused a landslide of things to come in for people that are not even remotely close to your level, Alex, saying, I need to do fasted training. I need to do all this stuff. I need to get fat adapted. Gosh, dang it, Alex. Why'd you do that?
No, that is a good opportunity to point out the fact that Alex is a different subset of even strength athlete in this context. He's an experienced one. He's got a lot of experience to build any training tweaks, anything he decides he wants to try is not just based on the latest insert magazine name here article.
Yeah,
this is true personal experience.
If you have any questions on fasted rides, just go to Lee_Jonathan and press send message and ask him.
That's great, because that's not my IG handle. That's wonderful. You messed it up. That's great. Okay, back to his main core part of the question. Sweet spot sessions in addition to weights completely frying you. In this case, go back to what we discussed about spacing things out. That's one of the most productive things you can do. If you're finding that combination is difficult for you, change it up. Try pairing sweet spot work with, try pairing your strength training work with something other than sweet spot work.
Yeah, honestly, there might be athletes out there who have great workouts following sweet spot work. They come into it nourished, they nourish on the bike, they nourish during their strength training. However, it may work out for them. This isn't to say this is a bad way to go, but as you pointed out, it's tough to pair those two things.
Yeah, you got to find out what works for you. I personally don't like sweet spot session the day after gym. In my head, it's because my body has time to have DOMs. So if I just put it all in one day, it doesn't have time to react. It's just like freaked out. So
sounds scientific to me. Yeah.
By the time I get to the next day and it's like, oh, wow, that gym session was hard. And then I do sweet spot, then we're in trouble. So I kind of just put it all in one day and let my body suffer.
Let's go to the 8th question. Thoughts on sticking to body weight only as an endurance athlete? I think it's a great approach myself, Chad.
Hey, okay. There are a lot of upsides. First off, mastering bodyweight movements, calisthenics, as they're typically called, is a high bar. And if you don't understand this, pick up a copy of Overcoming Gravity. It's in its 2nd edition right now, written by Stephen Lowe. It'll blow your mind. Or just go to YouTube or the website CaliMove and watch some things that truly body strong athletes can do with just body weight. So, I mean, what I'm saying here is that if a generally strong body is your goal, this is an excellent solution. I do see at least one potential limitation in that body weight at some point is probably not going to load your bones sufficiently enough to promote bone growth. And very likely you're going to top out. But I I just don't think it's a bad way to go. If we're talking about the goal of having a strong body, simply a strong body so that you can ride your bike better, resist fatigue longer, maintain coordination longer, all the things that come with having a generally strong body. I don't think there's anything wrong with body weight strength movements, except that they're probably going to top out, or they will top out sooner than loaded ones.
But think about it. That extra kilo you were worried about is now an extra kilo you're lifting.
Good point.
That's
right. Yeah. One thing to add to this, I just want to incorporate a live question that just came in. It says, during recovery weeks, what is the right level of strength training? And once again, you have to keep intentions in mind. So the goal of a recovery week is to deload your system, right? You've been progressively loading your body with more over the loading weeks that you had. Now you have a deload week, being your recovery week. So for strength training, keep in mind that the goal of that week is to accomplish deloading. In other words, make yourself get a bit of freshness so then you can take on more load moving forward. So this is going to vary for each athlete. For me, I found that I can keep my strength training consistent throughout this time period, throughout the load and deload weeks, and I'm just fine, unless I'm going through like a really difficult training block where it's, I'm really pushing up against the stops. And in that case, I'll likely do less strenuous strength training, but I'm still going to do something. I've even replaced strength sessions with mobility sessions, something that's more akin to yoga as well. Yoga can still completely fry you depending on what you're doing, by the way. So,
yes.
But I'll make adjustments as I go, but whatever the goal or whatever the outcome is, your focus should be to not load your body with too much work. So that probably means that if you're new to strength training, you might go a little bit lighter during those recovery weeks. If you are very experienced with strength training and you aren't trying to push your 1 rep max or something like that, you can likely just carry on and be okay.
And there's a volume consideration to be made here too. Because if you're a low volume athlete or a low volume endurance athlete training 3 times a week, I've found that I can have athletes continue to strength train almost as usual during a recovery week, because those 3 days a week that they were on the bike doing hard work, they're now doing easy work. They recover faster. The training load's not as high. So the volume might influence it too. You step into higher volume plans, then everything Jonathan just said is probably applicable. The goal of that week is to shed the fatigue, and it's going to be hard to shed it in the face of ample strength work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think you just got to be, as with all things we've been talking about, just honest with yourself. Like, if you can handle it, you can handle it. If you can't, there's no like shame, ego involved or shame. Yeah. To step away or plug it with something else. I do like Jonathan's idea of putting in mobility or some other, even if it's just foam rolling or yoga or whatever it is. Yoga can wreck you, by the way. Just to save that time. I've talked about it before, but time management is super useful. So if you spend a week and you give up those strength training sessions, you'll easily find something else that's creeped into its place. So I like still kind of carving out that time on those gym days to do something productive, even if it's an hour-long nap.
Hey, exactly. Right.
Keep that schedule.
Yeah.
I like it.
9th question, thoughts on suspension strap style training, like TRX systems. So these are like the straps that you would hang from a bar or from some sort of hook, something from above you. And then you either hook those to your feet or your hands or anything else, anywhere else on your body to be able to do movements where you are partially suspended.
Yeah. So effectively what I just said, all the same stuff, because we're still talking about body weight training here. The only difference I think is that it might top out a little bit sooner than if you have a pair of parallettes and a pull-up bar and you're doing handstand push-ups and pistols. I think this might be just slightly more limited. I'm not savvy in TRX systems or suspension-based systems, but I do recognize that it's pretty hard to load those outside of body weight. So they're probably going to, and they're a little more limited in what you can do with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you'll tip out a bit sooner, top out.
They are awesome for maintenance and traveling, though. They do sell ones that just go on the top of doors. So like in a hotel room or wherever, you just put it on the door and close the door. And you can use that as like a mobile gym. Like say you're going somewhere where you don't have a gym in the hotel or whatever, but you still want to get that maintenance session in. There's some good movements in there to not necessarily, like you said, push the high weight, but to keep that muscle memory going and to keep those movements in your routine. I normally pack one of those.
I like them for, so mountain biking in particular, you do a lot of very dynamic movement where your body is unstable and not on its particular or a typical axis and position that it sits on a bike. You're dealing with like a lot of lateral movement and like kind of cross functional movement from one side to the other. And I really like it for that level of specificity. You can make your body pretty unstable with those. And then there's no need to add extra weight. You don't need to do like, a Bosu ball with like a board on top of that, and then another ball on top of that, and then add weights. Like you don't have to go crazy with your gym work. Keep it simple. But these things in a simple way create instability that forces you to work on a whole lot of coordination as well. So that can be really helpful. That said,
for sure.
The same thing can be said with any sort of weighted exercise as well.
And that's what I was going to say. I mean, anything that brings about improvement, absolutely do it. I just think both of these things could top out before they get us to where we want to be.
For sure.
Yeah. I don't think it's an avenue to be a good strength training athlete, but it is a good alternative when you don't have a full gym available.
Which brings us to,
should I consider yoga as strength training since I'm an endurance athlete?
Yes. So yoga is a lot of isometric contractions, right? Contracting the muscle without lengthening or shortening it. It can also add elements of heat if you're doing the Bikram or some offshoot of that. Odd positions lead to flexibility. I mean, it's very much about improving flexibility, but I see yoga as less strength training than flexibility and or core training. The loading of the spine, the joints, the muscles, et cetera. I don't think it's going to be sufficient for very long. So I'm going to hit you with a couple opinions here. First off, do yoga because you like yoga, not because you want to be a faster cyclist. And secondly, I'd prioritize mobility work, flossing muscles, doing joint extractions, rolling them, smashing them, all this stuff. I think in the case of an endurance athlete should be prioritized ahead of something like yoga.
Yeah, I think that they can complement well.
If you have time for all of it, do it all. But
for sure,
most of us don't.
The mobility work, we've mentioned this so many times. We even recorded a podcast with him, with Kelly Starrett. He's incredible, fantastic resource. He's, I know that when you look at him, you'll be like, that is a huge rugby player or power lifter guy, but he also loves to ride bikes and he knows what he's talking about. And he's trained and worked with some of the best cyclists really ever. So he's a great resource on this, and his book, Becoming a Supple Leopard, should be used like a manual to be able to figure out how to open up different ranges of motion and address problems that you have with your body. It's just incredible. So, Derek Teal, again, mentioning him, Dialed Health guy, he has mentioned even just spending, like if you're listening to this and you don't do strength training, he's like, just exploring your full range of motion, even just like start with that. And that's something Kelly Starrett has said as well. He's like, did your shoulders explore their range of motion today? How about your hips? And it's those little things that a lot of the time we get so focused on the fact that like, I need to be doing weights and I need to be doing these specific exercises, and then we lose the plot. Instead, it's just focused on making our body more capable. So if that looks like yoga and that's what you can do, that's great. If that looks like anything else like that, like Chad said, that's great. Sure, there might be limitations that might top out sooner, but the goal is just to make you a more capable, durable, healthy athlete. So
one thing I like with this stuff too is trying to find ways to incorporate it into like day-to-day life, like exploring this range of motion. Like if you can like work like with your laptop in like a couch stretch or something like that, I think it's nice because you're able to incorporate these things. And the first thing most people do when they're like, oh, I got to add this, like where do I have time to dedicate to this new thing that may or may not add speed, where it's like, oh, I can go ride my bike and see a power meter and get my instant gratification. So I like finding ways throughout the day to see if I can incorporate a couch stretch while I'm in a meeting, or, different things, and like walking the dog or whatever it is, and just focusing on those things, trying to incorporate them into everyday life. So it becomes a habit when I do those everyday things.
Next question says, how should I change my strength training as the season progresses? Fantastic one. In other words, periodization, Chad, does it apply here as well?
Yeah, and it does. But traditionally, let me walk you through this. Traditionally, and this is even for endurance athletes, you have a period of anatomical adaptation training, right? Where you're getting your body ready to deal with heavier loads. And that can be anywhere from 4 weeks if you're experienced up to 12 weeks if you're not. Then you segue into strength endurance, where, you know, the loads come up a bit and you spend 4 to 6 weeks there, and then you eventually move toward that sought after max strength phase for another 4 to 6 weeks. And then if you're going to throw in some max power phase, that's another 2 to 4 weeks. And then finally you get to maintenance training, where you only have to train once a week. So so many phases. First that max strength training is all about developing maximum force, right? I find that applicability to be minimal and not really a relevant ceiling, not the one that it's portrayed as being. So I don't have much use for it, except in specialized situations. Same goes for max power. We're trying to improve that rate of force development. Again, I find the applicability minimal. I think better time is spent on developing your anaerobic and aerobic capacity, because as endurance athletes, those are far more relevant. All I'm saying is there are other boxes to check first. You can move through that whole progression, but if you're already dealing with a reasonably complex endurance training regime, man, that's a lot to do. Or regimen, sorry. So realistically, I combine the first couple, the anatomical adaptation and the strength endurance, into a single phase. And that's what you do. And then eventually you get to your maintenance phase. So what that means is during base build, you're training for 2, maybe 3 times a week. I like to reserve 3 times a week for experienced lifters only. You only need 2 to start. If you find out you can handle 2, you can always add that 3rd day, or you can add more sets or more exercises or whatever it is for you, but start conservatively. Then when you move on to your specialty phases of training and actual racing, you're back into maintenance. Same things, just doing it once per week. And then should your strength training aptitude grow, then this whole groove greasing mentality becomes more strength training. We move down the continuum, and the movements become paradoxically more basic, because now they're heavier and they're lower rep. So for instance, where you may have started using high reps on a single arm dumbbell press, now you're into low reps with heavy load on a barbell bench press. Similarly, you started with single leg split squats and dumbbells carried at the sides. Now you're loading a barbell onto your back and doing full range back squats.
So this is, Chad, this is my perspective on this, and correct me or share any contrary opinions if you have one. You too, Alex. But I think that for a lot of athletes, focusing on periodization where you're getting into max power and everything else is probably it's a bridge too far, perhaps, in terms of where you should be right now. A lot of athletes, it's more about just getting used to incorporating strength training into your routine, getting past that initial adaptation period, and then just making the habit of strength training. If you do 100%. If you do the same thing every time, like, yeah, you'll get used to that. And there'll be, low hanging fruit that you could take advantage of by changing up your routine.
Just do different exercises.
Right. Exactly. It's less about so cyclists, if you're hearing this, don't freak out because you don't know how to periodize through that process. Like Chad was saying, really, that's what Chad's talking about that's traditionally the way that people go about it. That's literally what he said, the word traditionally. That's how people go about it. But that doesn't mean that that's the way that you have to go about it. Something's better than nothing.
I just firmly believe that things as nuanced as max strength training and max power training have their place, but they're a little too specific for most of our needs. And they're a little too complex to pile on top of what is already probably a reasonably complex training approach. So yeah, it's just a lot to do. And by keeping it simple, you greatly increase the changes that you'll increase your consistency to a point where you can start to see benefits from your strength training. And of course, diminish that possibility of injury.
Yeah. My personal experience is exactly what Chad outlined. We take our 2 weeks off every year. We get back in the gym. That's when the AA comes in. And then that's when I'm doing, body weight and barbell level stuff to reinforce that. And then we get into strength endurance, and pretty much we do that until we race. And then we drop from 3 sessions to 2 a week when I don't have a race that weekend, and from 2 to 1 when I do have a race that weekend. And then 2 weeks off at the end of the year, and rinse, repeat.
Awesome. Yeah. And I don't bother. I mean, maybe someday when I really want to focus on, if you're the sort of athlete that really wants to hit 1 rep max and stretch that and go, you probably already know enough about this sort of thing of periodizing your strength training that you already know. For the rest of us, it's all right. Next question. Are any of these suggestions different for multi-sport athletes? Great question.
Yeah, for sure. They can be. Again, you don't have to overthink it, but if you want to get a little more specific, I'm all for it. I think that multi-sport athletes should favor vertical presses and pulls. So we mentioned press, pull, hinge, and squat. Overhead versions of this or even alternating between horizontal and overhead versions or vertical versions are a good way to go. Just swimming for obvious reasons. I mean, that right there, you need to be able to move your arm overhead, and it needs to be, the cuff in particular needs to be strengthened. Multiplanar movements. I think in the case of endurance athletes who run, doing lateral work, lateral banded drills spring to mind. Sidestepping basically strengthens muscles that you're not going to target otherwise if you're moving in a single, typically sagittal plane, backward, forward sort of stuff, up, down, and incorporate rotation. And this will differ a little bit from what I'm going to talk about next, which is mountain bikers. Rotation as actual rotation. And this is, again, due to swimming, but also because there's a little bit of movement with the arms in running. Anyway, it dials back to specificity. But I also think with those 4 basic exercises that anytime there's an opportunity to incorporate safely rotation, absolutely do it. We don't get enough rotation. We don't move in that plane enough in the gym, but man, do we rely on it in day-to-day living. And then sensible specificity enhancements, they're always encouraged. So if there's some way where you recognize that I can make an exercise a little more specific to what I'm going to do on the race course or on the bike, why not at least try to weave it in here and there.
What about the same question, but which exercises are best for mountain bikers?
Yeah, and the same thing. So minor alterations, sorry, in the interest of specificity. So that could be a grip width when it comes to presses and pulls. So, as a mountain biker, you're probably on, a flat bar that's quite wide, right? Your arms are out. So why not practice pulling if you're doing, say, a body weight row, where you're pulling yourself up to a bar with a grip that emulates how your hands are going to be placed when you're on a mountain bike. Same thing goes with pressing. So maybe your bench presses are with slightly wider set elbows. I'm all for staggered stances when it comes to your hinge training and your squat training, because that's the position you're going to be on, especially when you're in a high hinge on a mountain bike, railing down a hill. I mean, that's the position you'll be in. Why not train in that position? And I do believe that mountain bikers can probably benefit slightly, at least, from favoring horizontal presses and pulls over the vertical ones. That's more in their realm of movement when they're on the bike. And in this case, I also believe in all cases, really incorporating rotation. But in the case of mountain bikers, it's more about resisting rotation, because now we're trying to improve stability on varied surfaces. We're not trying to let the trail tell us where to rotate our bodies. Rather, we're trying to hold our bodies in a particular position and resist that rotation. And there are a lot of ways to do that. And we're going to touch on that when we get to the actual exercise recommendations.
Oh, that's so true. The rotation part is key. It's so in moments when you tend to crash on a mountain bike, it's usually because there were forces that came in that were required, or that were trying to get you to rotate or move in a specific direction. And instead of resisting them and having the strength and coordination to do that, you gave in, and then they tossed you. This is really common in turns. When you come into a turn faster than you think, and you hit that berm and it compresses and it tosses you, instead of you using that berm as an opportunity to pivot. You need strength and you need coordination in order to do that. When you come into a drop and you hit that drop and it hits you way harder than you think, suspension rebounds and your body isn't ready for that. Once again, you've lost control. And anytime you've lost control, you're prone to crash. So like, one way to think about it for mountain bikers is you want to maintain control for more linear feet of that course than you would otherwise. Like, that's a very simple way of looking at it. Let's say on any course that you spend 25 feet on that portion of that course being out of control. That means 25 feet of that course, you are leaving everything up to chance. If your strength training can decrease that to 12, to 10, to 8, to 4, then you can ride with so much less anxiety. You can ride with much better economy and energy in store, and ready for you to be able to take on the more important things like passing people, right? And winning the race. So this is when the rubber meets the road for strength training, particularly in mountain biking. You need to be a dynamic athlete that can respond to really like mechanically complex situations in terms of the loads that your body is going through with you on that bike. Hugely important. Alex is good evidence of that. Okay. Is there any major benefit to doing back squats over barbell Bulgarian split squats, which we're going to get into that sort of, you're going to be able to see those exercises actually in a little bit. Due to historic knee issues and leg imbalances, I tend to prefer Bulgarian split squats and unilateral squat variations in general. Is doing exclusively single leg squat variations detrimental in any way?
So when it comes to endurance athletes, in almost no ways. Show me a study that says otherwise. They're potentially more damaging, which means bilateral movements are potentially more, unilateral movements. So what we're talking about are potentially more damaging, and this can lead to longer recovery trajectories. So you can load, if you're doing, say, a split squat, you can load that leading leg, the squatting leg, pretty relatively heavily in such a way that it actually inspires more muscle abuse, more muscle trauma. And this can lead to longer recovery trajectories. But this too harkens back to me saying lighter loads, more repetitions, grease the groove, all that stuff. That's really the only downside that the literature presents. And I've combed a lot of it. The upsides, however, it's safer just in general. They're typically lighter loads. There is a control or a balance challenge that often weaves its way into all of them. But again, they're lightly loaded, relatively speaking. Additional stabilization is required. And this means more muscle recruitment, typically a favorable thing when you're trying to improve neuromuscular communication. You can make them very much more sport specific. I mean, everything we do as endurance athletes is almost entirely unilateral. There aren't too many sports, in fact, that are exclusively bilateral. And really, strength training is the only one that springs to mind. And there are numerous studies supporting similar, even identical effects when comparing bilateral and unilateral training. So as I see it, I use bilateral training to mix things up. Otherwise, if I had it my way, it'd be entirely unilateral training.
I really prefer the unilateral stuff myself in terms of functional strength training as a cyclist. I find that it allows me to kind of break down the coordination in a more simplified manner and be like, now I can work on really keeping this leg stable, just this leg, instead of having to worry about both legs. It's like putting bumpers up in one regard when I'm talking about building up control and coordination. And I'll take all the bumpers I can get when bowling and also when strength training. So, Alex, you do a fair amount of unilateral exercises too, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I do a mix of both. Bulgarian split squats is a good one for that, and then I also do front box squats. So I don't really necessarily favor one over the other, but
we've got a bonus question. How much should I do? I've typically scaled everything off of my 1 rep max. And this is common for, even if you took like a strength training class in high school or something, this is probably how you were introduced to strength training if it was through a traditional way.
Yep. And this will be a slightly longer answer, but I do think this is extremely relevant. And I'm hoping, even though this is kind of a complex answer, that the takeaway is a very straightforward and simple one. And I'm hoping this will help people figure out how to prescribe load when it comes to strength training, which is what we're talking about, strength training load prescription. And 1 RM in percentage-based loading is pretty much the norm, right? That's what we've done for the longest amount of time, but it's limited as a workload metric. And I'm not going to pretend that the other methods aren't. They all have their limitations, but I'm going to discuss these particular limitations because I think they're harder to overcome than the limitations of the system I use and a lot of strength coaches use. So first off, determining your 1 rep max can be pretty laborious and potentially dangerous. So, I mean, you tell me, you want to walk into the gym and say, today I'm going to do this exercise and I'm going to take 5-10 minutes to figure out what my 1 rep max is. And then next time I'll come back and I'll do the lifting. I mean, it's not realistic, especially when you have 5, 6, 7 new exercises in a workout. So determining it is problematic. Estimating it, if it's the same limitations estimating anything does, it requires a bit of trial and error, and you may never be spot on, but you're probably going to be close enough.
I estimate I can bench press 400 pounds. Just so you know,
only 400.
You all should know that.
It's a good estimate. It's very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Okay. So additionally, blanket use of percentages of your 1 RM. So if you're not familiar with the term, 1 RM is your 1 repetition max. So what you could move 1 time and no more, and probably barely. But using this percentage of 1 RM in a blanket manner is problematic. And let's take a couple examples. A few: training to failure at 80% of this. So 80% of your 1 RM load, the difference between the toll it takes on your body to sit on a bench and pull a cable into your abdomen, seated rows versus a backloaded squat. 2 different things. 80% of 1 RM to failure is only going to set you back so far during the rows, probably going to have a higher consequence with the squats. Performing 10 to 12 reps at 70% of your 1 RM in an isolation movement, like say a biceps curl versus a compound exercise versus like a snatch or something that's a lot of muscles, or even just a squat again. It's apples and oranges, or just different kinds of apples anyway. It's hard to compare the two. They take very different tolls on your body as a whole. That 70% 1RM, again, 14 reps can be easy for some on some exercises, totally brutal for others. So, you're good at things you're good at, your fiber composition is what it is, whatever explains it. It's not across the board, doesn't make across the board comparisons feasible. So I look at a couple load prescription alternatives, and I think the two best going are velocity based and what's called repetitions in reserve based RPE. We're going to focus on that second one, even though it sounds really complex. So what are repetitions in reserve? This is just an estimate of how much you probably could do. So you pick something up and you do 10 reps and you think, I could probably do this 15 times, or maybe you do it 15 times. But all of this can be related to RPE. And again, bear with me. This is needlessly complex. I'm going to simplify it. But if you were to leave 10 repetitions in reserve, so you have to do 20 reps, but you're going to stop at 10, this would be a 3 RPE, way down low on that 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 RPE scale. If you were to take that set all the way until 1 to 2 repetitions in reserve, so you're going to push it up to where you could maybe eke out 2 more, maybe 1 more, you're high on the RPE scale, 8 or 9 RPE. A max effort where you push to failure, leaving no repetitions in reserve, there's your 10 RPE. Personally, with this system, I have no use for the translation. I just look at repetitions in reserve. So let me give you a step-by-step example of the process to land at an appropriate repetition in reserve. First, get a sense of what you can move for the prescribed repetitions. So 15 times whatever exercise, whatever weight. This is the fact-finding mission you have to go on every time you endeavor into a new exercise, right? You have to figure out what you can move. Then you can compare the different repetitions in reserves impact on your endurance training, your fatigue levels, your soreness, your motivation, your recovery duration, such that you learn over time what serves you best. But I want to warn you right now, err conservatively. And the reason is that training at 6 repetitions in reserve, so leaving 6 repetitions in reserve, yields the same results as training to a point of 2 repetitions in reserve. And that's a recent study that just surfaced. It's a well-formulated study, and it's not the only one that supports the same notion. So it's the same volume, but of course you have to do more sets if you're leaving 6 in reserve. So you have to calculate, if I'm doing less reps per set, I'm going to do more sets, but those sets are going to exhibit less stress. They're going to require a shorter recovery duration, and they're going to benefit you in the same, if not similar way, or at least similar ways in terms of strength increases and muscle mass increases, hypertrophic results. Turns out, and more studies are piling up to support this, that the optimal is leaving about 5 reps in reserve, even higher. Some of them have shown 10 reps in reserve. The consensus right now is they don't know where exactly the high end of it is. So it seems like people are landing at 5 reps in reserve. So this means if you can move a weight 20 times, you're stopping at 15. If you want to take it to the extreme end and leave 10 reps in reserve, a weight you can move 20 times, you're only doing 10. Of course, you have to do twice as many sets. So you're still getting the volume, but again, less muscle trauma, less recovery time, less central load, et cetera. So you get the same increases in strength and hypertrophy, and you get a quicker return to readiness for your endurance training or even your next strength training session. So with all this in mind, it brings me to 2 recommendations I feel are very worth consideration. First, avoid training to failure. The recovery trajectory is untenable for endurance athletes, and they're starting to find that it's not untenable, but just not recommended for strength athletes too. There are better ways. It's not to say failure training doesn't have a place, but that its place isn't the only place as it has been. And then the second recommendation is, touched on this, move lighter loads with greater frequency. Again, 15 to 20 reps, nothing wrong with pushing up to 25, 30 repetition. High repetition training versus low repetition training yields similar growth and strength outcomes. Again, a lot of literature to support this. This whole notion of fiber type specific hypertrophy isn't holding up against good research design. It's kind of fading away, or at least there's more research in opposition of it. So takeaway being is that a wide range of reps and loads is effective. Okay. So you can go heavy, you can go forever. It's entirely up to you. I prefer safe loads done far from failure. Okay. So overall takeaway in the context of training twice a week, strength training twice a week, train 6 movements. do high rep, weights you can move 15 as high as 30 times, go well short of failure. Leave 5 reps in reserve. Do this for 1 to 3 sets. And this all depends on results. Start with 1, see if you can handle 2 or need 2, maybe then move up to 3, get it done inside of 30 minutes.
Chad, I'd have even one more possible avenue for a person to be able to use instead of 1 rep max for scaling. Start with body weight and then work your way up slowly over time. That's another option that you can do. And that's probably a safe option for sure. Granted, you can still get hurt doing body weight exercises, right? If you have bad technique. But if this will allow you to start at the beginning, to not completely, well, you might still blow yourself up with DOMs, it happens, but to probably not completely blow yourself out of the water. And then you can work your way up. It also probably works well on the financial side as well. If you have access to a gym, that's one thing. But if you don't have access to a gym and you're doing something at home, you can just pick up heavy things and use them. But if you're looking to, build up gym equipment and do all of that, start with your body weight and then just get the weights as you need to get the weights. Just kind of piece it together as you go up. So that's another option. I really like the great layout though of the way to incorporate strength training like that, Chad.
Thanks.
Awesome. Fantastic. So let's do a review and then let's head into some of the exercise recommendations and we can check those out.
You got it. So first off, I just want to reiterate a number of things I said, maybe tack on 1 or 2 other little tidbits of advice. First off, keep it simple. I've said that already. Press, pull, squat, hinge. Keep it short. It's easier to maintain consistency and you can always increase your workload, increase your duration as your body adapts. Thirdly, favor high reps initially. Grease that groove, bed in those mechanics. Fourthly, don't know if I said this explicitly, but train movements, not muscles. I'm not talking about biceps curls. We're talking about rows. So not just growing the beach muscles, but actually doing something that involves and favors and benefits the entire body.
Throwing some curls for good measure.
Okay, nothing wrong with having beach muscles. Just if you can incorporate that bicep curl into a more usable movement, I'm all for it. Next, let fatigue and fear of injury guide your overall workload. Initially, be afraid of getting injured. Be conservative. Thirdly, no, we're well past that. Exploit more accommodating training phases to learn your limits, to surmise the benefits. And this is probably going to be transition and base phases. These both take place early in the training cycle. So if you're going to make mistakes, it's a good time to make them. And endurance training loads are typically lightest in these phases, though sweet spot training does actually challenge that paradigm. So back to the whole balance and figuring out what works for you. Okay, with all that said, let's just do the exercises. Jonathan was kind enough to record versions of all these exercises. And I think we're going to play them.
Yeah, please don't judge my form. Producer Maxine, thanks for getting these to play.
I've already judged your form, but it's pretty good Chad. In all cases. This is why people have personal trainers. They pick out things you can't see while you're doing it.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate you. Maxine, do you want to show the first one being the hollow body single arm dumbbell press? And then what Chad can do is he can kind of explain
right now
what these look like. Yeah, so then people can actually kind of, the listeners can see what it's like.
Sure. And for people who are watching, you can see it. For people who are listening, go back and look at the videos later, perhaps. Anyway, so it's just a hollow body single arm dumbbell press. So you're in a hollow body posture, which means your legs are off the floor and ideally your pelvis is tipped up and your shoulder blades are off the floor. And that's key. When those shoulder blades come up, you get a whole lot of abdominal activation. This is one where you can, I like to resist lower body movement. So as a one arm drive, it tends to pull the legs one side or the other. Try to resist that. This is one of those opportunities to resist the rotation that it's trying to inflict on you. I like to do it in a bench because the ground, you can see Jonathan's bottoming out before his range of motion ends. So I prefer to put it upward or raise it up a bit. That's it.
Awesome. Next one would be the single arm dumbbell glute press. And this one actually, this is a super effective one for cyclists, I think. Works on a lot of glute strength and coordination too. It's
a good one. Yeah. There's a lot of posterior activation going on right here while you're in a pressing motion. So this, the width of the stance can actually really influence where the challenge resides. If you put your feet close together, it becomes very much a hip exercise. I mean, you're still pressing and still gaining that effect, but with the feet wide, not much of a stability challenge, not a heck of a lot of hips, bit of hamstrings and calves and whatnot, but mess with the stance on this one. And also that position is a difficult position to get into, trying to slide down to your shoulder blades. You'd be surprised if you have long enough legs relative to the height of the bench, you can just do that on the bench. Shoulder blades are down, feet press off on the floor, and your butt comes off the bench. You're effectively in that same position, and it's way easier to get into.
And also, if you're watching on YouTube right now, sorry if the video is a bit glitchy. We just got a notification from YouTube that they're experiencing streaming problems. So, but hopefully you can see some stop motion or something in between there that they can help you figure it out. This one's really tough, Chad. When you're doing this one, basically, you know, your shoulders are on the bench or on some sort of surface, and then you're making your body like an L with your legs pointing down to the ground like that. It's really easy to let your pelvis drop, to let your hips drop.
Yeah, and a lot of your stability comes from your glutes too. So it behooves you to keep them up.
Yeah. And it's when you're doing the movement, it's easy to focus on the movement of pressing that dumbbell upward. And then you forget about what's going on in your core and your glutes. And you'll notice that you're way less stable when that happens. You're much more stable when you're really focusing on keeping that contraction and that tension through your body and making it really feels like you're pushing your hips upward into the sky, but really you're just achieving flat.
And just so, about all of these are rather complex and with reason in mind. I mean, I actually want these to be a bit of a cognitive challenge. I want you to have to learn how the entire body works together with each of these movements, how pushing the arm affects the hips, how raising the hips affects stability of the rest of the body. They're just, they're complex for a reason.
Yep, for sure. Next one is kettlebell gorilla rows.
Yeah, so these, you can understand where their name is derived. It's a very gorilla-looking movement, and the way Jonathan's doing it right now is with an alternating. It's a very safe movement to a degree, in that he's setting the weight on the floor and then pulling the next weight. Where it's not safe, and I would recommend maybe not jumping into such an extreme posture, is he's completely vertical to the ground. If you can support that, that's all good and fine. I'd prefer people start with a bit of even a 45 degree, maybe lower sort of angle, so that they're not in such a compromised lumbar position. But that's the way this exercise looks. This can be grown to where the hands, or the kettlebells in this case, could use dumbbells, can use gallons of milk, doesn't matter, are resting on the ground. Get to a point where you don't rest them on the ground. And then eventually you can grow into what's termed as a crossover movement, whereas one arm comes up, the other descends, and you're constantly moving. And that's when it gets super specific to riding a bike. This also offers an opportunity for rotation. As his elbow hits its high point, he could turn his shoulder girdle into it, such that there's a little bit of rotation at the waist, and the shoulders are turning away from the hips.
Yeah, this one is one where you can do it. Like, the kettlebells are fantastic for it. And it's basically like you just make a U. It'd be like if you're doing a hamstring stretch almost, but your legs are slightly bent, and then you just have the kettlebells to give you a little bit of extra height. But Alex, you mentioned something that you do with deadlifts, and this could also be applicable here as well, Chad. If you have particularly short or tall legs, which I have long legs for my body, but if you want to achieve a flat back, you can stack something, whether it's under your feet or under the kettlebells or whatever you're lifting, right? In this case, to get more flat.
Yeah. And if you're using dumbbells, you can do the same thing. Like, obviously kettlebells are nice because they're quite tall, but if you only have dumbbells available, you could put plates. Work for me. I put plates underneath my deadlift to raise it 4 to 6 inches, just because if I hinge all the way to the ground, then that first 6 inches of lift is compromising my lumbar because I'm bending at the back. So same with any movement that you're bent over. Even just taking the time to film yourself from the side to see how it looks is super helpful to make sure that you're doing it correctly. And again, 100%. Another benefit of not going the 1 rep max route is starting low and building up to it, is you have the opportunity to fix these things first before you're getting into the heavy stuff.
Yep. Next one is another one where this can absolutely apply: the Pendlay row.
Yeah, so this is a similar movement. It's just done with the barbell. So again, I can't emphasize enough, a safe hinge angle. So right now he's at the extreme. He's got a 90-degree bend there. It's pretty hefty. So feel free to come out of that, stand a little bit taller, and then mimic the same pull. And this is an opportunity to vary your grip based on your specificity. So he's got pretty much a mountain bike grip on this. It's overhand and it's wide set. And I'm all about specificity. I do believe it's useful. It can get dull though. So if for no other reason than entertainment value or just changing the stimulus, move your hands around, go with a narrower grip, go with an inward grip, go with a mixed grip. I mean, just change it up a bit. You're not going to change the exercise so much that it's going to miss the point.
Yeah.
For this one, oh, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, I do the same one, but actually start the bar as if I was going to do a rack pull. So it's at my knees. So I lift it there, stand, hinge to only about 45, 50 degrees, do the exercise, stand back up and walk it back. So you're never actually having to lift this from the ground unless you're able to, obviously, and an advanced strength athlete to have the 90-degree angle.
Or you're working with a very light load. I mean, it can be a broomstick. It can be a very light load.
Yeah. And it's a key to mention before that Alex has mentioned for his height, he has shorter legs. So this is why this is the cool part. You can make all these sort of adjustments and alterations to be able to make it work better for you. So this one, Chad, when I was doing it, I actually got into what does a hinge situation feel like when I am mountain biking and descending.
I can see that. Yeah.
And that's one of the cool things that you can do for this, like strength training, especially when you're lifting bars and plates. There's a lot of Olympic folks that are, ollie lifters who will be very strict on technique with good reason because they're lifting heavy weights and they don't want to, cause injury or anything else. But there is room to have slightly different technique and to bring in more specificity. Like Chad's talking about for mountain biking. Next one, we're going to get into the squat side of things. This is rear foot elevated Bulgarian split squats. This is probably one of my favorite ones for working on stability issues with knees and hips and ankles and feet. It's just a fantastic exercise. And elevating the rear foot, I think, adds an even better range of motion, deeper range of motion that you can get with it.
Mm-hmm. This is go-to bread and butter endurance strength training. This is what you should be doing as an endurance athlete because there are so many benefits. I mean, the flexibility, the mobility, the strengthening, so many things are happening right now. So again, it's a rear foot elevated split squat. They're often termed Bulgarian split squats. Same idea. The rear foot is raised. He's got it raised pretty high. That's a difficult get, and it's actually it's pulling him into a forward lean. He has a kind of what I would consider a too short stance, but what I really like is he's got his foot. It's the top of his foot is on the bench. If you put your toes on the bench, it's a serious cheat. There's a tremendous difference because then you're deriving quite a lot of power from that rear leg, more than you'd recognize until you switch to that flat foot. And man, does it change that exercise. But I think his stride's a little short, and that can lend to knee aggravation. So if you have knee issues, go with the long stride and just trim the range of motion. Don't go so deep. In that case, you may find you have limitations with the trailing legs, hip and quadricep flexibility. So it could pull you into a bit of a forward lean. That's totally permissible. I mean, what we're after here is a big range of motion with that leading leg with minimal assistance from any other part of the body. He's carrying the dumbbells at his hips. That's stage one. You can bring them up to your shoulders. Stage two, you can put them overhead. That is a brutal stage three. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to evolve this exercise to incorporate other parts of the body that right now aren't active, but this is the most stable version of it. I would just like to see a longer stride so that he's not stressing that knee.
I agree. And you can see because my knee drifts too far over my toes, right? Too far forward. It's a good indication that it's not a long enough stride. Next one is box squats, which in this case, we didn't use a box. We used a bench. You can use any object that's about the right height, right, Chad?
Anything. We just want something back there that tells you you're achieving depth. Just anything. It could be personal, inappropriate though it may sound, holding a hand. You just need to know that you've met the range that you're targeting. And with this exercise, why I like box squats so much is you can load them in about 1,000 different ways, and you can place your emphasis on first attaining the full range of motion. And what the full range of motion is for you to determine. I mean, do you want a subtle bend that mimics exactly what you would do on the bike? Do you want to get to 90 degrees? Do you want to get below the crease as it is so your hips are lower than your knees? Can you go all the way down without tucking the butt? You decide what that full range is going to be. Achieve that full range before you start to load this. And how you load it, like I just said with the previous exercise, you can load it in a number of ways. Kettlebells at the hips, at the shoulders, dumbbells, overhead, a million different ways to load it.
So much to be learned from this one without weight. When you add weight to it, it can mask a whole lot, Yeah. And this is why people have mirrors when they strength train. It's not just for vanity. It's to be able to check your form and to see what you're doing. And once again, if you have a friend or camera or anything else, it really helps to be able to film that stuff and check it out.
It sure does.
Yep. Okay, now let's get into more hinging movements. So single leg dumbbell deadlift.
Okay, so I always prefer the single leg version of any deadlift just because I'm prone to injury with deadlifts. And I think a lot of other people are too. Alex and I talked again before the podcast. He's a long framed fella. So for him to get into a low enough position to pick up a barbell already puts him in a precarious spot. Less so when you can actually tip the hips, which is not desirable in this exercise, but you can at least to pick up the weight, and then you can determine what range is allowable without risking injury like you would with a barbell version of this or a 2-leg version of this. But this is another one you can load with anything, gallon of milk works, but a kettlebell, a dumbbell. The key is to keep a pretty long standing leg. Subtle bend is okay, and do not tip the hips. You're trying to activate the back of that supporting leg, so the hamstrings and the glute especially. But he's also keeping a nice long back with a flat lumbar. Is a good looking version of this exercise. And what I do like about the flexibility of it, the flexibility of the exercise itself is pretty great because, like I said, dumbbell, kettlebell, whatever. You can also load it ipsilaterally, which is he's doing contra, but ipsa, you could hold the weight in the same arm as the standing leg. So if you're standing right-legged, you're holding it in the right side. That's a lot easier to stabilize than what he's doing, which is contralateral or cross body, where this is another opportunity to resist rotation. Because he's reaching toward the opposite foot, the tendency would be to twist the body. He's not allowing that.
Yeah, you'll have to fight that. This is one, again, fantastic with no weight. I mean, if you're familiar with yoga, what is this? This is similar to like Warrior 1 or 2. I can't remember one of the poses, but you can, without weight, you can extend the arms over or outward so that they're parallel with your body in that flat planed position when you're hinged over. These sort of things can really help. And this one will bring out all sorts of instability that you have. I have weak feet, like many cyclists do. And as a result, when I do a lot of these, I have shoes on here because I didn't want to gross the world out with my feet. But many times I do things barefoot. So then I can actually build some strength in my feet because they aren't very strong. And it can, if you aren't stable down there, this sort of movement really pulls that out and it allows you to focus on it. Just fantastic one. So love it. Next, our last one is going to be single leg barbell hip thrust. Now I didn't do this with the barbell. Instead, I just grabbed a plate, and you can just grab anything heavy or not even, you can use it without weight too. And work on this. This is
a great body weight exercise. The doing a double leg hip thrust like this probably isn't going to be challenging for too many people, but doing an unweighted single leg version of it will be challenging for just about everybody. It's not an easy get. You can start with a 2-leg version, but with this one, the one tip or thing to point out, I guess, is that the position of the foot can change the exercise pretty noticeably. So if he pulls the foot in toward his butt, he'll get a lot more hamstring, puts it out, shifts more toward the glute. But either way, your foot placement will influence where you feel the most of the stress in whatever belly of whatever muscle it shifts it to. You can load it with a barbell, though I do recommend a pad because it can get really uncomfortable. And you load it with really anything, kettlebell, dumbbell, again, be creative. But the single leg version of it, start with body weight and then grow it from there. And the comparison between hip thrusts and I'm pretty sure it's deadlifts. It's hard to differentiate which is the more beneficial exercise. It's not hard to differentiate with which is the safer exercise, which I wholly believe is this one.
Awesome. So there's some great exercises. We're going to have a blog post, and you should follow us over on Instagram because we'll also have a post with all of these exercises so you can visualize them and see them if you're listening now. So head over to TrainerRoad on Instagram. Just look for the name. You'll be able to find it there. Give us a follow and check this out. Share this one with your other cycling friends too, so then they can see these different exercises. And then chime in and let us know which exercises you do and how you found them helpful. I think that if we can make that comment section about that will be really helpful for a lot of different athletes. And it'd be great to have, whether it's Art O'Connor listening to this from WooCar Fit. He trains a lot of athletes for strength, Dialed Health, Derek Teal. It'd be great to have you guys in there too. So then we can help a lot of cyclists and get a lot of people together talking about this. Chad, thank you so much for putting together that deep dive and then also the conversation. Alex, thanks for being here. I'm glad that we had an athlete that believes in strength training like you do to be able to answer all those questions too.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.